5th, a meeting of the Ojai Groundwater Management Agency Board of Directors. I want to call the roll.
Director Daddy?
Present.
Director Thelke? Director Thelke?
Yes, here.
Chair Hages?
Here. Okay, stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, comments, Peter,
Nothing for today.
Bob?
No, there were some interest from some people about the proposed, or the rumored RV park over at Soul Park. And the discussion was if the people couldn't get the water for the KOA up the hill, what were they gonna do to give water to the proposed park? That was it. I don't even know that that's this board's business, but that's all I've heard from people.
Well, they have service from Casitas too, so I don't know if they use well water in the park
There's 3 wells at Soul Park,
on the
county.
No,
golf course or on the park.
I'm not sure exactly where they're located.
they're on the golf course.
They're on the golf course? Okay.
They're not at the park.
At the park.
Oh, I see.
No.
Okay. That answers that.
Yeah, I don't have anything either. Okay, the next item, general manager comments.
All right, it's been a busy month. Since I started as a GM, there have been 6 well applications that we have pushed through our process. I checked in with the county to see if any of those had pulled permits yet, so we could start sending them statements. 3 of the 6 have been completed. The other 3 haven't even applied for well permits with the county. So of those 3 that have been completed, I have 1 completion report so far, and I've had communication to try to get the other 2. So I will still keep following up on that. Had a call earlier this week with our website provider who let me know about a bunch of new Department of Justice requirements for public agency websites, mainly to do with ADA compliance. So there are some new features that we're going to have, and because they're hosting it, our fee is going to go up for them hosting it. Our annual fee is going to go from $1,080 to $1,740. So it's a big jump, but there are a lot more requirements that it has to have. All the PDFs have to be ADA compliant. We have to post an accessibility statement, updated each year. We have to make sure all the videos are closed captioning, which because we have them on YouTube, they are. There's a process for people to request remediation for PDFs that are not compliant. So there's a whole laundry list of things. And that will take effect October 1st when our current contract expires. They also provide some liability insurance because that is an area that is ripe for lawsuits if your website's not ADA compliant. So the plan that we have will come with a $10,000 indemnification amount. We can upgrade that if we want more, but I'm going to check our policy to see if we already have coverage. Let's see, we did upload the spring groundwater monitoring data to the Sigma website, to the portal. I checked in with the auditors. They're working on the 4 years of audits, and I plan to have those for the board to approve at the August meeting. So that's moving along. Jordan prepared a sampling and analysis plan as a draft, and I gave him my comments, so we'll get that one wrapped up soon as the next one of our GSP implementation measures. One of the next ones is going to be working on a data management system with Dudek, which will probably be a web-based GIS type of system to host level and groundwater quality data that would meant to be publicly accessible for people who are interested in that information. And then we had talked about outreach last time, and you remember I had that brochure I prepared. I had some harder stock paper brochures made, and I had a meeting with the Keller Williams local office this afternoon, actually, before this meeting, to let them know about OBGMA and how they can inform their clients about our requirements, and gave them all the brochures they can have available to potential property owners, well owners. And I talked to them about a bunch of casitas stuff also. So I think that's everything. It's been busy.
Thank you. Okay, basin report.
Chair, could I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Manager's comments. How long do people have to hold the permit after they've gone through the process? Do they have forever, or do they have just a year or 6 months? How long can they let inactive well permits sit there?
From the county, that I don't know the answer to. The county issues the permit. I can't recall if our letters have an expiration on them or not.
Shouldn't we have an expiration so we don't have a bunch of languishing out there that aren't using, and then something happens and all of a sudden everybody starts drilling like crazy?
I can look
just
into
think
it.
we have stuff out in the future that we granted that we don't know about. And
That's why I have this list for myself to follow up with the county at least once a year, if not more often. It seems like it takes a long time. I think well drillers are really busy. I don't know if you can corroborate that.
Yes, I think to the point of expiration, the county permit has a 6-month shelf life before an extension needs to be collected or granted. And most drillers right now have about a 2 to 3 month backlog locally. Some of the bigger drillers tend to have 6 to 8 months. So there's a little bit of balancing act between those two timeframes. But as far as the OBGMA goes, as a verification, I think we're really more into the knowledge of what's happening than permitting. So it's, I think indefinite, infinite timeframes is not what we're looking for, especially with updates to the GSP
I
conditions.
just see the process with state water continuing to change. And when people don't pull their permits and language for a while, we're gonna see changes made that are not gonna be on par with what the current regulations were at that time. So, just a thought.
Yeah, I think if someone doesn't act on their permit from the county and enough time goes by, the county's gonna want them to update something from us before they move forward. So if the regulations have changed in that time frame, then they'll have to meet the new ones.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to basin conditions. Topic of today's presentation is hot but not bothered, and this really speaks to the temperatures, of course, that we're seeing this summer, but really how well the basin has responded to the heat following 2 really wet years, and how while it is hot and there is quite a bit of demand on the basin from pumping, its effects aren't really being seen just yet. So it's hot, but we're not bothered. Year-to-date rainfall totals, 48.35 inches on the ridgetop and 28.86 inches on the valley floor. That's as of today. We're not expecting a whole lot of precipitation between now and the water year end. So this may be it, but still puts us well above average, as you know. What that has done for the basin at the Keywell point, the double peak that we've seen in the past 2 years, we had 45.54 feet below the ground surface at the Elrod well, April 16th, 2024. Just the other day, yesterday, it was 69 feet, 92% capacity, about 73,600 acre feet. You can see that for July, that's still much higher than many years' peaks. In fact, there's only about 10 years whose peaks were shallower than what we're seeing this summer. On a more expanded scale, this is that same water level hydrograph, but expanded since October. So basically just we've seen this water year. The scale on the y-axis here is about 100 feet from the bottom of the white field to the top of the white field. So you can see about that 50-foot worth of rise since the nadir in October to that April peak, and really a slow humpback liner of a trajectory over time. As artesian conditions were present, we had some wraparound of supercharging of the basin, as we're calling it, before we've come into the summer recession that we tend to see every year. And the slope of that line, as it's going down to the right, tends to be pretty consistent year to year, whether or not we're at this much storage or much less storage.
Hey, Jordan, and is that specific to Lucille Elrod's drawdown, or is that well just giving you a generalized sense of the overall drawdown in that area, regardless of what she's doing?
Right. So her actual drawdown is only shown on about the 4 pumping periods that are shown. She doesn't pump that well very often, or at least hadn't this spring and into the summer. So you can see the larger dips are representative of her actual pumping, and those are only drawing down about 3 feet or so every time she pumps. She or her irrigator or son-in-law or whoever is taking care of it, since John has passed for now a decade or so. But we use this as the key well because it is centrally located within the basin. It's effectively fully penetrating the basin. It's been there for a long time, and because of its relatively infrequent use, it's a great monitoring point, as well as the access that they've granted to the OBGMA. The county used the nearby well at Carnan Grand that has been monitored since the 1940s, and that's something that we use in that hydrograph that I presented in the previous slide. The problem is that because that well is shared by so many parties, it's actually pumping much more frequently. So in addition to that, access is not as clean as for this well. So this well is, in our opinion, far superior to use as a key well for the OBGMA, in that we have a good long data set now of over 10 years. We've got access and the relatively infrequent pumping of that particular well. Budgetarily speaking, inflow and outflow, Gridley Creek coming into the basin at 0.49 CFS senior, there about 1.72, Thatcher 0.36, Reeves 0.28, surface flow out 0.34 CFS, and surface flow out at San Antonio Creek of 16.2 CFS. What you'll notice here is that this really seems to be in balance with what's coming out versus what's going in. And a lot of that has to do with the very hot temperatures that are creating much more phreatophytic uptake in the headwaters and really limiting spring flow from the bedrock to the alluvial channels and streams. Much of what we're seeing here is also taken up by the phreatophytes in those streams. So what we're seeing as the input is really a minimum. So when we measure the surface water inflow of 2.8 CFS, that's still quite a bit of water, to the tune of almost 1,500 gallons per minute coming in continuously. But that's just what we see at ground surface. There's still some subsurface flow coming in the alluvial channels under which we are measuring the surface flow. On the outflow side, the total of 16.5 CFS is much larger, obviously, than 2.8, and that's due to both the perched water system, artesian wells still flowing today, and that wraparound or supercharging of the main portion of the basin as the water levels had risen so high that they've kind of gone around the horn to contribute water to the perch system from the uppermost portions of the basin. In cross section, we've now built out this over the course of the past 7 or 8 years, and certainly conditions wetter in 2023 than we'd ever seen, and mimicking that here in 2024 with just a little bit over an average water year. What we're noticing as we build this out is something new every single time, and what I'll call attention to is really the slope of the line from the time when continuous flow occurs. Continuous flow on San Antonio Creek is occurring when those vertical light blue bars are present from top to bottom. And then as flow recedes each year, we start to see the break in surface flow such that surface flow is not continuous across the basin. And then each blue square, light blue square, represents the point of daylighting groundwater in lower San Antonio Creek flow, still over the basin. And you can see it gets down as low as that 650-foot elevation, but still much lower than the elevation of that key Elrod well in the darker blue hydrograph. And then the surface flow instantaneous discharge are the magenta X's. So between those 3 key data points, we're starting to see more of the pattern of how once continuous flow stops, and this is the takeaway from today's lesson, is that we really see this precipitous drop off right about now in the time and space continuum of flux here, in that we have this uppermost wraparound that's discharging right around that 750-foot elevation, right in the middle of the graph, right about where the blue boxes, blue squares, start to go laterally to the right in that top step. Then things start to go down really fast if there's not enough water in the basin as a whole and the perch system specifically. Graphically, this is what it looked like back in February. In this graphic, I have a map with the camera indicating about where this photograph was taken in the basin. And for many of these, we have the February time versus today. So you'll notice a couple of things in this theme. Things, of course, being much drier. Also a lot more plant growth since that February time frame. So most of the photographs I'll show here, that's coming into Reeves. Here's Thatcher Creek under the bridge in McAndrew, rushing down the Cascade in February and today. Much drier, much more foliage, and of course algae. One of our most beautiful dry crossings at Ladera, going toward Hermitage, back in February and today. Trickling over, a little bit more algae. Further up San Antonio, or Senior Canyon really, there's this wonderful log that is a great monitoring point as long as it stays there. Back in February and today. The algae here is very, very predominant. And this is interesting because it's such a high elevation. It's really above the basin where much of that algae is coming from. You're not seeing a lot of septic systems or irrigation or fertilization up there. It tends to be more of that naturally occurring nutrients and actual algal blooms that we're seeing contribute to that mat. Underneath the Senior Canyon at Ladera Road Bridge, which we started using as our monitoring point for inflow there. This is back in February and today. San Antonio Creek near Grand Avenue Bridge, looking to the north, then and now. Completely dry at the surface flow here. And this is one of the places where the flow is bifurcated and is no longer continuous across the basin. However, we're still seeing artesian flow in the south central depth discrete monitoring well on South Fulton Street. Montgomery or Fox Creek going under Creek Road back in February. And for once, I don't think there's been any more graffiti. But
Not less either.
not less, but less flow. Yeah. Our monitoring point of surface water discharge these days, where the main portion of San Antonio Creek is exiting the basin, back then in February and today, visibly declined right there. And that's about a third of the flow, of course. Here's the Old Creek Road Bridge. Rushing back in February, you see how turbid that water is. 2 channels, one underneath the radar gauge and one further to the west. And today, a lot more plant growth and a lot lower, clearer flow, but for the algae, especially on the west channel, which is still there. And down by the confluence with Ventura River today. Going forward, we like to say something about what NOAA is at least predicting. You may have heard quite a bit about La Nina coming back after El Nino last year. And I think earlier in the summer and late in the spring, there was much more confidence about there being La Nina arriving. La Nina typically following El Nino, surface water temperatures in the ocean a bit cooler, and conditions tend to be a bit drier and colder, at least in my experience, in the following winter. And what we've done now is refined many of those models. I say we, meaning NOAA, has refined those models to switch from La Nina definitely to just a La Nina watch, which, hey, be on the lookout for it, but it's not as extreme as they were expecting. And what that means is that we're now technically in the prediction of El Nino surface oscillation neutral conditions. So not El Nino, not La Nina, what some people call La Nada. So what that means for temperature over the next few months, we're looking at below average precipitation seasonally, at least through October, in much of the middle part of the continent, where we are, as usual, equal chances of average, and that's always a good bet. But typically, if we do have a La Nina condition, it tends to be drier than the preceding El Nino year. Although if we are indeed in neutral conditions, then my money's on equal chances of average. Any questions?
Bill?
Is that okay if I,
Sure.
were you expecting,
Can you turn the mic on so
Yeah.
that it can
Jordan, just a quick question, thank you for indulging me. Was that artesianal flow still occurring with the drying out of the surface flow at San Antonio Creek at the Grand Bridge? Is that something you expected, or is that something new that requires some modeling adjustment?
It's the artesian flow that we still see at the depth discrete monitoring well on South Fulton Street is expected because we had it literally go around the horn last
okay.
year. So this year we were expecting that particular casing, which is the intermediate shallow casing, to continue flowing artesian. It's the elevation of the water surface there is higher. It's under pressure and actually above ground surface.
Right.
The perched system, or the SWUZY, is 4 feet below ground surface, and then the main aquifer, which is pumped by many of the wells nearby,
Right.
is some 14 feet below ground surface. So you have the shallowest zone that is losing a lot of the water to San Antonio Creek from the perch system with a water level that's below ground surface.
Okay,
You have an intermediate zone that's just below that has water flowing like a fountain under artesian conditions. And then deeper than that, you have the main aquifer, which is pumped with the deepest water levels of all.
okay,
Now, what's interesting is that the well on Boardman Road at Ojai Avenue, which had famously flowed artesian most of last year and the beginning of this year, has now ceased its artesian flow. So it's no longer losing that water to San Antonio Creek in surface conditions. So long answer to your short question, which is yes, there is still artesian flow despite the break in surface flow.
And it's within the it's within the parameters on the modeling. It doesn't require modeling adjustments, this experience.
To my way of thinking, no. It's the way that the conceptual model of the basin fits that model.
All right. And then another question from the past. I remember there being some questions about the county and other agency monitoring levels that were very distorted by the alluvial flows, particularly at the lower reaches. Has there been any movement towards fixing that problem, so we're not reporting false information anymore?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, there is an annual move to that effect.
Okay.
Because what we see on those websites where you're looking at an instantaneous flow tends to be really for flood awareness and emergency conditions, the alert gauge
Right.
system, as it's called. And
But they were using it for other purposes.
people were erroneously using it for
Exactly.
But all of those are caveated with preliminary data.
Okay.
And then annually, the county fixes the problem by reconciling the actual flows with the remote gauge indicated flows.
Okay.
And thereby only publishing and modifying the hindcasted conditions.
So those
to reflect
distortions
the
are being more or less handled at this point.
So, as usual with science and data, if you're patient, eventually you'll get the right answer.
So, yeah, okay. And then, last question, I promise. We're having, between the county proposal for significant RV encampment, the Cabrillo, and then the school system's expectations, is there any threshold for aggregate additional demands on the water supply, the primary being the community facilities district, that require thresholds that require modification to the models, to the DWR reports for sustainability? Is there any sort of trigger for the aggregate effect of all of these things? And particularly with the county, is it something where the county needs to interact with the OBGMA in some respect in order to maybe consider some mitigation issues? Just wondering.
All of those developments have service from Casitas.
There what?
All of those developments have service from Casitas. And Casitas has an annual limit on how many acre feet allocation it awards.
Right.
The impact on the basin is,
In other words, cumulatively, they're nowhere near any triggers that require changing the DWR sustainability reports.
no, not on the basin.
Thank you.
Chair, may I ask a question? What I'm gathering out of this is when we reach capacity, 79,000 plus acre feet, I don't think we can hold 80, but I think 79. Once we get to around 75,000 acre feet, the aquifer at Boardman stops. Is that correct? Regardless of how it gets drawn out of the underground.
Because that well at Boardman is in one of the shallower aquifers, I think that well's only about 150, 160 feet deep or so. So it's what we call at the depth discrete monitoring well in South Fulton Street, the intermediate shallow zone. And that's something that is not really used by too many folks. And it can be separate from the actual total amount of water in storage within the basin. But it does tend to track that once we get down around that 75,000 acre foot estimated volume within the basin, that Boardman well would stop flowing artesian. So you literally have something that is sort of the first, it's a very visible
Indicator.
it's a sentinel well, really, if you think about it. It's an indicator of what is happening to the basin. When that thing's flowing, wow, it's probably going great. We got plenty of water, let's pump it. And when that starts flowing, that's the first indication that summer's here, and look to the next sentinel and indicator for the next conditions.
And then the next well, monitor well we have west, do we have something on Gridley? Don't we aquifer wells on Gridley, which is gonna be down 50, 75, maybe feet in elevation? I'm talking about elevation, surface elevation down to static water.
Right, the monitoring well that we have on Gridley is called the Lago Marcino well. and it's further up toward the north side of the basin, toward the foothills to the north. And it's close enough to the depth discrete monitoring well on South Fulton Street that with those number of casings in that single borehole just right here, we really have our finger on the pulse of the basin.
Okay, I'll bring that up at another meeting.
Another question? Jordan, on that sentinel wall on Fulton Street, is that over, that's above the so-called perched aquifer?
The short answer is yes. The surface location is above the SWASE, the southwest uppermost saturated zone or perched aquifer, but it does have the 4 casings. So the shallowest casing is only 28 feet deep, and that is the perched aquifer representative. And below that, the next casing is about 130 feet, very similar to the Boardman Road well. That's the one that's flowing artesian still. And then we have an intermediate deep casing that has a deeper water level, and the deepest casing there is 330 feet, all in a single 12-inch diameter borehole. And we're using that to monitor automatically the conditions of the basin there.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next item is public comments on items not on tonight's agenda.
Tom,
Could you use the thing for the record?
People can't hear you at home if you're not on the mic.
Well, they usually can hear me, but that said, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. Tom Hicks, water attorney. Speaking tonight on behalf of the Ventura County Resource Conservation District. There's the Ventura River In-Stream Flow, or VRIF project. And at different times, we've been mercifully outside the main discussion in the litigation. But we know that at different times, OBGMA has made reference to the possibility of taking actions to encourage voluntary pumping reductions. And I just want to say on the record and maybe inquire at the same time that there may be an intersection with some of the work that the RCD is doing through this VRIF project. There are a lot of uncertainties still out there in the basin, but we would think that to the extent that state water, or I should say state money might be available to work with landowners to incentivize some reduction in pumping. We're on record in all of our reporting on behalf of voluntary landowner conservation incentives that provide some form of conservation credit. And in this case, there may be an alignment with whatever OBGMA is considering or maybe starting to consider that would be in alignment, I think, with the RCD's approach to if people want to figure out how to keep more water in the ground or conserve it, there may be ways that state dollars or other incentives can work with landowners on really landowner-friendly terms, but things that might align with what OBGMA might be talking about when it's thinking about how to encourage these voluntary pumping reductions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anybody online? Doesn't look like it. Okay, the next item is a consent agenda, finance report and minutes of June 27th meeting. Do I have a motion?
Move that we accept the report.
Peter,
Yes.
you need a second.
Oh, I'll second it.
Okay, call the roll.
Director Daddy,
Present.
Director Thilke,
Yes.
Chair Hages.
Yes. Okay, item 8, discussion items, delinquent well owners enforcement and penalty authority.
Right. So the last few months, CC and I have been exerting a lot of effort on catching up to, I'll just call them delinquent well owners who have either been not reporting on their quarterly statements or don't have a meter, or both. I've been contacting them by phone, writing letters with Peter's help, have spreadsheets prepared to go through with all the rate changes that we've had to figure out how much is owed. Been somewhat successful in that. Out of about a dozen or so letters that have been sent out, we've gotten 2 to come to the table with their fees that are due, and the rest we haven't heard from at all. So in working with Peter, getting his help to go through our enabling legislation, resolutions, ordinances that OBGMA has passed, figuring out what the next steps would be to get those owners in compliance. That's what the cover memo that I put together describes, and Peter's memo goes into more discussion about it with the alternatives. We are allowed to impose penalties and fines. There's probably needs to be a board hearing before we do that, which gives the owner a chance to present their side to the board. And then we can impose the fees, penalties, or fines either through filing a lawsuit through Ventura Superior Court or placing the delinquent amount on the property tax rolls through the county assessor's office. So I wanted to just tee that up for discussion and hopefully get some direction on what the next steps need to be.
Yeah. Any comments?
Yes. 2 out of 12, how many total do we think we have? And let me put them in 3 categories. No meter, not reporting, and not paying. I see we have 3 categories. And so of the 3 categories, how many of our 180 or so users do we have?
We have about 150 users.
150,
150.
okay.
I would say about 40 of those don't have meters. The stack I've been going through, every time I go to the office, Cece gives me a new stack. I mean, I've gotten through 12 or so far. There's probably another, what would you estimate, Cece, that haven't been reporting for a while? Maybe another dozen?
Yes.
Probably another dozen. The dollar value, so far what I've come up with is about $32,000 in back fees owed. About $9,000 has been paid. So there's another $23,000 floating out there that hasn't been paid. And that's as of June 30th. So it's the ones that haven't paid, you know, they're just gonna keep
Not paying.
not paying
And
and
how,
adding to how much they
how
owe.
many of the not paying would you think we have out of our 150?
Oh, I would say about 25.
25? Okay.
Yeah.
So
How do you-
we've
How did you
got,
estimate what was owed if they're not metered and they don't report?
So if they owe and they're not meter, this is where the effort is expended. I have to go through their physical folder and see how they've been reporting in the past. Some have just been reporting the 0.5 acre feet per quarter, and I've just been using that to calculate it. But in the letter I send them, you also are required to install a meter and give them all the forms and put them on notice that they need to install a meter, and their future statements need to reflect the actual metered usage. So I'm trying to address both in the letter, if that's what the case is. Some have reported, but they are not happy about our GSP fees, so they've only partially paid on their statements, and I still have to calculate what their GSP fees are and send them a letter to that effect.
Well,
So there's-
$1,000
it's
a
a-
day could wipe out what they owe us, so.
Julia,
It's a mishmash. I wish there was a standard template that I could
there,
give you.
there is.
Yeah.
We have agricultural reports that are gonna say, so many acres, so much crop. You got 600 trees on so many acres, and it's gonna take this amount of water a year. We can work that backwards just by, and then send a bill based on what the
Interesting.
ag department
that
comes
you
up with.
say that because Cece and I had a call yesterday with Carp Valley Water District, who is the GSA for the Carp Valley groundwater basin. Their approach is to use GIS and aerial photos and determine how many acres are in production of what type of crop. The advantage they have is because they're also the water district, they get a crop factor, and that changes every year depending on what the precipitation was. They base that on customers who are 100% on carp water and how many acres they have and what type of crop. They can tell what that crop factor is. They apply that to all the other parcels, subtract out, if they have a carp meter, subtract out how much they use, and come up with a number. And then annually, they report that to the County of Santa Barbara and put that on the property tax rolls. It is a significant exercise that involves GIS, a company that does the aerial flyover to determine the crop types. Again, CARP has an advantage because they have the water meter data. OBGMA does not have that water meter data. So it would be,
Well, I think,
It would be
It-
simple. We bill them, and they submit their water meter data as a credit, or
Yeah,
they get billed
exactly.
for the entire amount. It's simple.
Yeah.
I think
I know you think it's simple, but it's a lot of time.
I think what happens is the users can determine how much fee they're willing to bear. And if they're willing to bear an extra $500 or $1,000 a parcel to go ahead and do the study for the determination, that's really up to them. They can decide what they want to bear.
So that would take restructuring our whole program.
well,
And how we determine what their fees are. So it's not impossible. It's just gonna take time to work through that with different ordinances, and come up with a different structure.
well, the problem I have is that just costs us more time and money and going after these people. If we have the ability to fine them, we'll fine them. We'll get our money one way or the other. I mean, they can come to the hearing and they can say, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to have to be fined. Okay, well, give us the data we need and start reporting. I mean, we put a lot of work into this and we're not getting much in return. So these people are being, they're just stonewalling us. And if we have the ability to do what's in these Senate bills and in our ordinances, slap it to them. I mean, we can give them a chance to come into a hearing and explain their situation, and maybe we can negotiate something. But if we can do that and put it on their property tax, it's the cleanest. Anybody else?
I would think, I'm going to yield down here. You have 75 people cumulative in some area here. And again.
Some are both.
it-
Some haven't paid and they don't have a meter, so there's some overlap.
And don't report.
Right.
Don't pay, don't report, don't have a meter. So it could maybe, out of the 75 for the categories, it could be 35 people. Some people are not going to do all three, right? I would recommend that we immediately put a lien on all their properties and not take them to court. Just put a lien on all the properties that are delinquent and develop these rules that we need and the modifications that we need. But I would do something now, so when somebody tells our general manager, shove it, we're going to go ahead and sell the property and you won't catch me, it stops that nonsense. And they start to understand. And when that happens to a couple, the rest of the people are going to understand that maybe they want to cooperate and we don't have to go through all this nonsense. So I think we start somewhere. When we have people that haven't reported, paid, don't have meters, and they're 5 years in arrears, slap a lien on them now.
Well, it's not that simple.
Oh, I thought you could slap a lien on anybody for any reason,
To-
anytime.
to-
You can't collect maybe, and you still have to go through the process,
We
but
don't
you can
have the
put a
ability
lien.
to slap a lien on. We either need to go to court to get a court order, to get an attachment order,
Okay,
or we go and work a deal out with the county where we can get whatever delinquent amounts exist on the county tax roll, and then it would become a lien on the property. But either way, there's a process involved, and it's not immediate. We will have to go through some steps to accomplish what you're
What
talking
would
about.
be the fastest, least expensive method to stop transference of property?
Okay, so what I heard was there's an interest in the board pursuing some penalty actions against these folks, right? And so, if I'm understanding correctly, staff will have to come up with a sort of a priority list and figure out who they're going to pull into a public hearing to discuss and impose a penalty. And that would be the first level, it seems, to try to get some traction. Now, just because the board imposes a penalty, now we've got delinquent fees plus penalties that have been assessed, they're still not paying. They could still stand back and say, no, we're not gonna pay. That's where we gotta think about, okay, what enforcement mechanisms do we have now, since they're not listening to the initial, penalty action type of coercion that we're trying to encourage. And that's where we have the ability to go to court, or get this put on the county tax roll. So, those are the options. But just today, we wouldn't have the ability to go slap a lien on a piece of property.
Okay. Well, and I've read through this thing, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it a little bit more. What about, when we talk about fees and penalties and all that, what about our cost that we have to waste all this extra time to, I think you said, coerce? I want to encourage people to follow the rules, but it's costing us time and money when we've got staff making calls and doing these things and doing the accounting. Are we able to add our cost into the liens or to the fines and to the fees?
So the board has a lot of discretion with regard to the amount of the penalties, and it seems to me that that could be a factor that the board might consider in assessing a penalty, along with other factors like how long has the violation persisted, how difficult is the party that we're dealing with, and the kind of response that we're getting. So there's a lot of different criteria that the board could look at in assessing a penalty, and staff costs is one of them. An additional point is that if we're going to go to court to get an order of attachment, we have the ability to present whatever our damages might be to the court, right? This is what these folks owe. These are our damages that we've incurred, getting the process to this point. It seems like attorney's fees might be involved in that. Certainly, I think staff time could be considered a damage, and ask the court to include that, tack that on.
If we take a different route, we're not bill collectors. We're not here to hound people. This is not what we're doing. This is not our wheelhouse at all. If we hire a collection agency and whatever those fees are those recoverable? Because I would propose that we not have our staff become a collection agency and have to go after these people. I would rather get an outside professional outfit to do that if we can recover. I don't want to spend a bunch of money and find out that we're stuck with 10 grand of, collecting 5 grand of water fees.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I'd suggest in that case that the board not focus on filing court actions to chase individual landowners, but once a year we go to the county, provide the county with a list of delinquent owners, the amounts. It goes on the tax rolls, and then it becomes a lien on the property, just as if you weren't to pay your property taxes, and then we don't have to worry about it from that point forward, right? Payment might not be immediate. It might have to go through a sale or something before the lien would actually be able to, we'd be able to realize the amount of money, right? We get it back in our coffers. But that seems like the path of, we go through the process, we figure out what's the amount of the delinquency, we advise them the amount of the delinquency, we tell them what the process is gonna be. This is going on the county tax rolls, you can pay us now. There can either be a penalty assessed or not a penalty assessed, but then once it's on the county tax rolls, it's pretty much out of our hands. We still have the ability to bring a lawsuit. All of these remedies are cumulative, and we can pick and choose which ones we want to pursue without preventing ourselves from pursuing another one at a later date.
And since we have different categories here, and 3, maybe 4, we can assess different fines for different not having a meter, not reporting, different penalties for not paying. And then if we do go to an outside agency, quote, the damages. So we can have 4 different types of fees or assessments or fines.
Yes. So each circumstance that you mentioned would be an individual violation, right? Not having a meter, that's a violation of a certain ordinance provision. Okay, not reporting, that's another violation. Not paying fees, that's another violation. So, yeah, there'd be 3 violations there. Each one could have a separate penalty assessed with respect to it, and then each one could have a daily penalty that's then accruing once the board decides to levy that.
And that
type
would
of
be
penalty.
collected by the county all in one package?
Once a year, we would have to go to the county and tell the county how much is owed. So it seems to me that we'd have to, at a certain point, we'd have to say, okay, this is what they owe as of this date, county, that would be the amount that goes on the tax roll. And subsequently, it seems to me there could be continuing penalties accruing that the following year, you go back and then there would be additional penalties put on the property.
It's a lot cleaner than having somebody going out and, it's once a year. If it's on the tax roll, you can't pay your property taxes a la carte. You either pay it all or you get foreclosed. So, and if it's in escrow on a sale, they collect the money.
We've got to find an easier way just to convince people to comply.
Well,
rather than drop the hammer on everybody. Okay.
There's
Thank you.
one, excuse me.
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But, last month, Jim Finch mentioned that, hey, let's have a couple hearings and I'll say slap some penalties on some folks and the message is going to get out and people are going to start paying.
yeah.
I mean, so that's a option to think about and pursue. And it sounds like
Yeah.
maybe the board has some inclination to go that route.
And you have to have a hearing and a public notice of any assessments you put on the property tax. So you could have the hearing, level the penalties, but then in April or whenever it is, we would be able to put it on the tax roll. We'd have to have another hearing and we'd have to show, they would have a chance to come in and contest it.
What Carp Valley Water District does is they prepare a letter and they show people what they're planning to impose on their property taxes, and they give them a date where if they want to question it or provide more documentation that it should be different, they give them a drop dead date, and
Yeah.
then they work with them, they sit, have meetings, whatever they need to do. And then I believe August 1st is the
Yes,
drop dead
August
date
1st has got to
for,
file with the county.
filing them. What I would propose is that Peter and Cece and I look through this list and find some that are probably the most egregious and prepare to have a public hearing on them in September. Give them their 30 days notice. I think tomorrow I would have to do it to get it on the August agenda. So let's maybe do something in September and get, 2 or 3 cases in front of you as a public hearing and go from there.
Anybody have any objections to that?
And then I'd also add that if the board is interested in pursuing the tax roll enforcement option, that we do some outreach to the county and really figure out how that might work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, they have a set procedure you have to go through to do that, so
I believe the board has to pass a resolution
yeah. Yeah,
with
we,
all the parcels listed and
right.
the amounts.
and we have to show that we comply with Prop 218, and the county will ask for all that stuff. And all they do is ask for a resolution saying you do, so.
I'm hoping it's not that complicated, and we just show them the statutory authority that we have through SIGMA
Mhm.
that allows us to put delinquent fees on the tax roll, and they're not going to require us to jump through a lot of hoops showing that we, in adopting these fee ordinances, we're complying with Prop 218 and different requirements. But,
Yeah.
we'll have to engage them and find out what they need from us in order to get something done.
Okay.
They do put liens on some of the wells. They already have some liens on them.
The county does.
Yes, like the Zara.
Right, if they're non-compliant, if the well is non-compliant per the county standards, then the county, that'll
Oh.
show up when it is in escrow.
Oh, okay.
But he decided to take on that.
Yeah, they're notified it's
Liability.
non-compliant, and then they just
It says-
acknowledge that it's non-compliant, and the escrow still goes through.
Yeah, through the title search.
Yeah.
But also there's another set of wells that are abandoned, I believe irreparable, according to your list.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can deal with those last.
Isn't that up to county health to make sure that they're closed for
Yes.
sanitation?
Well,
But theoretically, they're still accruing wellhead fees
Yeah,
from us.
yeah.
and the county sends out an annual usage statement, and the people fill it out, and they sometimes don't tell the truth.
For the record, Director Whitman is present. Anything else on that? Okay. Next item is Legislative Ad Hoc Committee. Do we have anything on that?
There was no ad hoc committee meeting since the last board meeting. I did just get an email from the Small GSA Coalition that the language that we wanted to have added to the climate bond was not added to the climate bond. So there won't be anything specific for groundwater sustainability agencies when that bond comes out for a vote. And there is a call with the Small GSA Coalition the first week in August, so I'll attend that.
And item C, meter compliance. I think we've beat that to death, so. Okay, is there any other business? We are not gonna have a closed session because Director Finch isn't here and Peter is physically not here, so I think we're gonna have to do it at another date. Okay, we were adjourned.
Exactly an hour.
We're talking separate from the. Yeah, I know that the potential for stormwater is significant. It adds up to thousands of acre feet.
So where is our seeding?
Yeah.
I'm pushing for that, because it's